So you're joining us for the IEP training today. Thank you for joining us. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate your time and the fact that you've joined us. This is our agenda. We're going to just quickly do introductions, and then we are going to walk through all of the sections of the IEP. We're going to share resources. We have quite a few chat box check-ins built in. But if you find that we're moving too quickly, if there's something that you need us to repeat, please feel free to interrupt us. Please feel free to let us know. If you're more comfortable just plopping something into the chat box, that's fine. We'll be keeping an eye on that as well. This is your training, so please let us know what we can do to make it work for you in the best way possible. So introductions. My name is Colette Sullivan. I'm the Federal Programs Coordinator. I have been with the Maine Department of Ed since 2018. And before that, I worked as a special education teacher for 30 years. And I worked primarily with students with autism. And the whole team practically is here today. Jennifer is with us. Jennifer, can you come on and say hello, please?
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Gleason. Like Colette, I was a special education teacher, and before that, an ed tech, before I joined this team 4.5 years ago.
Thank you, Jennifer. Carly is here with us as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carly Thibodeau, and I have been with the Maine Department of Education and this team for just over 3 years. And before that, I was a teacher for 21 years.
Thank you, Carly. And Ashley is with us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Satry, and I joined the monitoring team about just a little over 2 years ago. Before that, I too was a special education teacher here in Maine and in Virginia for 14 years. And thanks for being with us today. It's awesome to see so many people from all over the state.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you all so much. Julie Pelletier is not with us today. She is what we fondly refer to as our wrangler, and she manages everything. She's phenomenal. All right, so before we get started, before I turn it over, just take a minute and just share in the chat, please, if there are sections of the IEP that you find more challenging to interact with or complete. We'd just like to know sort of what the field is thinking about the IEP, and this will be really helpful for us too in terms of shaping this PD moving forward. So just take a second to drop any thoughts in the chat for us around that. And then I'm going to put myself on mute and turn this over.
Okay, I think that's my cue. So as you're dropping your sections that are more challenging for you in the IEP, I'll just give us about 30 seconds maybe. I'm not very good at the wait time thing, so we'll give it a try. And I've seen one come in. Oh, yep. So we've got some goals. Yep, the goals are tricky. House statements, goals. Yep. We do have a lot of information about goals. Oh, transition. That's a good one. We do have a transition focused on transition training coming up. Today, we will not be talking about transition because that's a whole topic in and of itself. But we do have a date coming up for that. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing with us. So we're going to go ahead and move on and get talking about some of these things. Okay. So we have been asked, we've had feedback around us explaining changes from year to year, because we do make slight changes from, we call them cohort years, but they're school years for all of you. So like from year to year, we do make changes based off of what we are looking at. We keep it aligned to the regulations, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and MUSER, the Maine Unified Special Ed Regulations. However, sometimes we tend to add things or take things away. And so this is just our note about some things that we have added this year. You can see down here, these are our additions. These are our codes. You don't need to know them necessarily, but we do reference them quite often because we use them a lot. And so we will be looking at written notices this year to make sure that all of the required members are present. We will also be asking for evidence that progress reports are sent home at least as often as those report cards are for gen ed students. And then if you are a school, an SAU that has taken on the responsibility of those 3 and 4-year-olds or just 4-year-olds, we will be looking for a representative from Part B being in attendance at that transition conference. Last cohort, we started looking at the transition from Part C to Part B, and then this is just another addition that we're looking at with this, starting with this cohort. So we've been trying to add things gradually as you all have been adding 3 to 5-year-olds gradually. So, and then just another note, this is a few more additions because like I just talked about, we're now looking at SAUs that are taking on that 3 to 5-year-old responsibility. And so with that comes some CDS Part C stuff about timely services, making sure that all of those services are in place, and then that initial referral, which is very similar to what we're already looking at for initial referral, and then that C to B transition. So if you are one of these schools that we would be looking at this, we can go into more detail if you would like. Okay, so today's training is about writing a compliant IEP. And we have worked on our IEP quick reference document, and we do update this from cohort year to cohort year. And so this is our most recent one for 25-26. We have been asked to make a couple of last minute changes. And so they may not be reflective on this with the one on our website. However, this is the one that is like pretty constant. And these are all the pieces of the IEP. So within this IEP quick reference document, you will find that every piece is laid out where we look at the pieces for compliance and best practice. And it's color coded so that everything that is needed for compliance is in red, and then the blue is best practice. And so we're going to kind of dissect the parts of the IEP and reference this quick reference document. And I'll just say my little thing here where if you're not using any of our resources, if you are going to start with one, I would recommend starting with this one because it will guide you in writing that compliant IEP. And then it is kind of a helper to do this self-assessment, okay? So this is our 25-26 self-assessment form, and you can use this. This one on our website is just a model. Nothing gets saved. We don't look at any of the information. We don't verify anything, nothing like that. However, when it is your SAU that is being monitored, like those in the 25-26 cohort, they each got their own personal self-assessment form. And so they went through this with their IEPs, or they're going to, if they haven't already. And so this is just kind of practice, and it's kind of a self-check, as it says. You just check yourself and be like, okay, are my IEPs compliant? I can go through, they're just yes, no questions, and you can go through each question and find out if you're meeting compliance with your IEPs. And that quick reference document will help you. And here's another snapshot of that, because they go by these codes that I mentioned. And so every question is related to that code around compliance. And so you can follow through this IEP quick reference document and then also go through that self-check. So you could use both side by side. So we're going to jump into sections 1 and 2 of the IEP. So the first thing that we look at when we're looking at IEPs for compliance is the date that it's sent to the parent. Okay. So it's stated in MUSER that it must be sent within 21 school days. So the way that we look at this is that we look at the annual date of the IEP meeting, and then we look at the date sent to the parent. And we make sure that that date sent to the parent is within 21 school days of that annual date of the IEP meeting. That's how we calculate that. We have seen that sometimes this is blank. So just make sure that you are documenting the date you are sending it home to the parent. Next, we also look to make sure that you're holding your annual meetings within that 364-day timeline. So we look at that by looking at your annual date of your IEP meeting. So in this case, it's 1/6/25. So then we just think, okay, then it should be one day less than that with the next year. So we look at the next annual date and look to see that, yep, this is 1/5/26. So that's 364 days, or within the 364 days. And that would be compliant. Now, there is another timeline here, and that is also its own 364-day timeline. And I think our next slides kind of talk about how this is broken down. So I'll jump here. So you can see for this one, the annual date was on 1/6/25. So that next annual is at 1/5/26. So that's annual to next annual. But to get your duration, your dates may change if the parents do not waive their right to that 7-day notice before you implement the IEP. Then you need to give them that 7 days to have that written notice before you implement the IEP. So that's your duration when that begins. So let's say you have your meeting on 1/6, and then you write your written notice and you get it out in the mail, and you give about 3 days for mail. So it gets in their hands, because the clock starts when the parents receive it. Okay, so they get it in their hands. So let's say by 1/10 they have it in their hands. You need to give them 7 days, and then it can start on 1/16. So we say give about 10 days from the annual meeting. If you're getting that written notice out, if you have a quick turnaround time. If you're taking a while to get the written notice out, you'd have to give yourself more time, because it's them having it for 7 days. So then your duration would go from when the IEP begins, and then it's a 364 days. Now, I talked about this a little bit just before about parents being able to waive their right to 7-day notice. So that means that the IEP can start sooner than those 7 days. It could be that same day if you decide, or the next day, or in 2 days, whatever the IEP team decides. However, the parents must waive their right to that 7-day notice. And there must be a statement in the written notice that says that they have waived that right. Okay. So you must document that there. And then the IEP can start whenever. So there is a time when a parent cannot waive their 7-day notice, their right to 7-day notice. Do we know when that is? Is it if they did not attend the meeting? Is it for initial eligibility meetings? Or is it neither of those?
Initials.
And only one of these is right. So thank you for coming off of mute, and you can come off of mute, or you can drop it in the chat, either one. Okay. So it is actually only if they did not attend the meeting. So that is the correct answer. So this actually came up, I think it's been a couple of years now. We've been training to this. It's kind of new guidance, because before it was both. It was both if they didn't attend or if it was for initial. However, we were informed by our assistant attorney general that it's okay that the parents can waive their right if it's the initial. It's only if they did not attend, because they're not there to waive their right. So there's that.
Can I
Okay,
ask a quick question about that?
sure,
Is they have to be able to sign the initial provision of services
correct.
for that to happen, which is the completed written notice, which isn't going to happen at the IEP meeting.
Mhm.
So how so how can they waive their right if they don't have the opportunity to sign that initial provision?
That is a very good question. I would say that that is a decision that, if you are a special ed director, which I think you are,
Yeah.
that you would get to make. So you decide how you would like your team and your staff to handle that. So,
All right. Thank you.
you're welcome. I think that there are some people dropping some ideas in the chat box. So you guys could always talk about that. So I'm going to move on to section 2 and talk about the different disability categories. So this is a snapshot from IDEA about the definition of a child with a disability. And I'm not going to read through this. We're just going to kind of move on. But basically, it's saying that they must be identified with one of the disabilities from those categories that are listed, and they are outlined in IDEA and user. So, and they need to be, the student needs to have specially designed instruction. They need to have a special education service in place. Otherwise, they are not a student that needs special education. If they just need related services, that's basically the gist of this. And so this is just kind of a little flow chart. I was not the brains behind this. So Ashley, if you want to come off and explain this, you feel free to do that. I don't want to mess it up in any way. So
No, it was taking that previous slide and just putting it into a visual format of, how to work through those eligibility steps for the disability. So,
okay, perfect.
Yeah,
so basically
love a visual.
Yes, we do love a visual. You're absolutely right. So just making sure that when you are sitting as an IEP team and you're making decisions about whether the student qualifies as a student under a disability category, you really want to make sure you're considering that the student has a disability that has an adverse effect on education as it's outlined in IDEA and MUSER. And we're going to talk about that on the next slide, because MUSER does outline the definition of each disability category and the procedures for determination. So it's pretty clear. Some are clearer than others. Some are vague. Some are very specific. So just making sure that you're really thinking about, okay, they may have a disability, yes, but does it have an adverse effect on education? And that's what those eligibility forms are supposed to help you tease out. So just thinking about that. Okay, so here are a couple of snapshots of different disability categories from MUSER. And so you can see here that the definition is here, but then MUSER, because these words in italics are what Maine went above and beyond the federal regulations. And so these are specific to Maine. And so these are there to help explain how you're determining whether the student qualifies for that disability category. And so the intellectual disability, there are very specific things that need to happen. And it says that all steps below must be completed or are required. And the same for this orthopedic impairment. And so you can see an orthopedic impairment is very specific because you must have a referral that includes a diagnosis from a licensed physician as to the existence of an orthopedic impairment. So when we start looking, and this kind of goes to alignment, because then if we start looking at section 4A, where you're putting those evaluation results, we'll be looking for evaluation results in things that back up that disability category diagnosis. And so just making sure that you're including those evaluations and, if need be, those medical diagnoses from the professionals included in that section to support that disability category. And then this is just a note that when we look at section 2 on the IEP, we're just looking to make sure that there's a disability category checked off and that it would align to those evaluation results and then, those other pieces. So when we see someone checked off as an other health impairment, one of the things that we look for are behavior rating scales if it's due to ADHD, depending on what that other health impairment is. But it's very clear in MUSER that it states that if you have a student identified as with another health impairment due to ADHD, there must be behavior rating scales. So we would look for those to support that. And then this is just a note that if you have a student that's identified as a multiple or having multiple disabilities, you want to make sure you check off multiple and then those disabilities that make up that multiple. So if we see that there are multiple disabilities checked without multiple checked, we would ask you to correct that, or vice versa. If multiple was checked and those disabilities that make that up are not checked. So just keep that in mind when you're completing that section. And then we give you some links to recordings throughout, just because we do have more specific trainings that have been recorded that really delve into some of these other areas, such as these eligibility forms. So you can go to these links and view those if you want to get more information around these topics. And then IEP Essentials for New Teachers would help you out with some of those other pieces. Then moving on to section 3, this is where you think about those special considerations for the student. Again, this is a snapshot from the IEP quick reference document. So it just kind of goes through in a checklist, like this is what you need to make sure you do. And so we really think of this as the table of contents. And so you just want to make sure that every question is answered here. It has to be yes, no, or NA. Something needs to be checked at each one because it shows that you thought about them. You considered it, right? And then if you check yes, we would look in the IEP for that corresponding information to be aligned to it. So we have some examples here where this student has 3B checked. So they have some positive behavioral interventions and supports that they need. And so it's checked yes. So we would look, okay, do they have any goals? No. Okay, are there accommodations? Oh, yep, there's an accommodation. This student just happens to have a positive behavior support plan. If you check 3B, you don't necessarily need to have something that specific. It could be just accommodations that the student needs to help them to be successful, and it's around behavior. But you want to document that in the IEP. And then also we have the 3C, which is about students being identified as a student who is an English learner. So if you say yes, and yes, that they have language needs which need to be addressed in the IEP, we would expect to see an ILAP or an individual language acquisition plan mentioned as an accommodation, because that means that they have language needs to the extent that they need services with that language professional. So if you have questions about the multilingual learner piece, we do have a website that addresses multilingual learners with disabilities that you can visit. And this is our contact information for Jane Armstrong. She is our state specialist. So you could reach out to her if you have any questions regarding that. Okay, and I am turning it over to Ashley.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we are going to look at section 4 of the IEP now, which is one of the meatiest sections of the IEP. And I know lots of people have questions about this, so I'm going to take my time on this section. So remember, whenever you see this dark blue background on our presentation here, that is the snapshot from our quick reference guide. So we're hoping that we can build in how to use that and how we use that in comparison with our self-assessment. So I just want to take a minute and go through this and what we're looking at here. So this is section 4. This is the academic and functional and developmental evaluation, strengths and needs of the student. So we're going to break down each of these sections, but we're going to look at 4A. And you can see that what we're looking for compliance here in section 4A is just these 3 specific things. You have to include those evaluations and support the eligibility discussion. Those evaluations have to be named, and those evaluations must be dated. So we're going to dig into that, but that's the overview. And this is what you'll see on that IEP quick reference doc. Then in section B, we look at AFS 1, which is that there are strengths for the student that are based on observations. They include areas of strength and or relative strength, and they're not a restatement of the evaluations. So that's what we're looking for compliance there. And then section 4C, there are 3 things in that section that we look for. So we are looking for the skill gaps for the academic needs. And it seems kind of silly that it says academic there, but that's just that reminder that functional and developmental should not go here. These should be the academic skill gaps. They should be distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps. There are some best practice notes about bulleting them in a list and focusing on specific skill deficits. And then we also look for the how statement. So very important, the statement of how those gaps that are listed above impact that child's involvement and progress in the gen ed curriculum. Oops, sorry, I've got to close that chat just so that I can see this screen. My glasses aren't quite cutting it this morning. So that how statement for each of those skill gaps, and then alignment. So APG6 is that alignment, that every one of those skill gaps that's listed in this section is aligned directly to a goal. So there should be a skill gap for every goal. So let's dig into that. And we'd love your feedback on this page, because our team has just recently decided that in our trainings, we think this has too much information on this one page, and it might be not as helpful as we think it is. So that's why I wanted to kind of go over the compliance findings here. So this is section 4A. These are the results of the evaluations. And if you look in that little compliance bubble first, it's the same thing from the quick reference guide that says that the evaluations here must support the eligibility discussion. And you want to think back to what Carly was talking about with the disability section, and go referencing user to make sure that anything that is required for that determination is here. And so you're also going to want the evaluation name, and that every evaluation that's listed here is dated. Now, other things that we would look for here would be academic evaluations that were used, functional evaluations, your relevant state or district assessments, your NUIA scores, things like that. You can put transition assessments here also, and then any other relevant assessments for your specific student, FBAs or related service evaluations, all of those things. And so we won't look too closely. This is just an example of a 4A, and this is the part we're feeling like is probably too much for this type of training. But again, just making sure that you are putting anything here that needs to be here to support that disability category, and then it's named and dated. And that's section 4A in a nutshell. We'll do a little like quiz / look at that through the lens of the self-assessment in a minute. But section B here, 4B, this is those academic, functional, and developmental strengths. Again, this should be, what do the strengths look like of that student in the classroom? Not a restatement of those evaluations, but what are their strengths in what they're doing? So we have an example for Leora here. Leora loves to read and has strong decoding and comprehension skills. She has strong writing skills and enjoys sharing her stories with peers. And Leora works hard and is very focused on all tasks presented to her. So that kind of gives you a picture of what those strengths look like in the classroom. Okay, now when we're talking about the academic section, these are the areas that we're going to be considering for academics, and those are reading, writing, listening, speaking, and math problem solving. And this is for the overall section of 4C, remembering to have those two parts. You want to have your distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps in academic performance, and how do those distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps affect the child's involvement and progress in the gen ed curriculum. So you can see the little blurb from the IEP that again lists those areas: the reading, writing, listening, speaking, and math problem solving. Those are the broad academic areas that you're considering, but your skill deficits should really dive deeper into those broad academic areas and be those skill specific things that you're working on with your student in your IEP goals. So as we all know, in reading, teaching reading, that is a ton of different skills. This is not at all an exhaustive list. This is just a few things. But what are you teaching? Are you teaching them decoding, fluency, comprehension, sight words? What is the specific skill that the student has been identified as having that you're addressing with an IEP goal? So just get as specific as you can with those skill gaps. And then we're going to talk about the how statement piece. So as far as your house statement goes, you can have one house statement that encompasses all of your academic gaps. If that's how you want to do it, you could have one per academic area. If you want to have a house statement for your math skill gaps and then for your reading skill gaps, that's up to you, as long as each of your skill gaps is accounted for with a house statement. So in the example for Jimmy has a fluency deficit. So this impacts his ability to access grade level reading materials in all subject areas. That's how that is impacting his ability to access his gen ed curriculum or classroom or activities. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. Those are just some ideas, but just remember to have your skill gaps and your house statement there. You'll see this visual several times going throughout the IEP, but this is that alignment piece that we're talking about. So here you're starting with your evaluations and disability category. Those are going to give you your academic and or functional skill gaps, which need to align to your measurable goals and of course your present levels of performance there. So here's a little visual of that one-to-one correspondence. We have a section C for a student who has a couple of gaps. They have a reading gap, and this is a good example of how they broke the house statements up into each section. So you've got a student who has reading gaps for decoding and comprehension, and these gaps affect Jack's ability to access grade level, I'm going to assume, reading material. And then writing, he has an essay composition gap, and these writing gaps affect his ability to accurately complete writing assignments. It's going to be what we're going to fill that in with right now. And then for math, Jack has a multi-digit addition and subtraction gap. And so you have his house statement there too, that these math gaps affect Jack's ability to access higher level math curriculum, I believe is the rest of that. But you can see that there are goals for each of these gaps. So you've got decoding, and Jack has a decoding goal for decoding beginning of 4th grade level text with 85% accuracy. He has a comprehension gap, and Jack has a goal for answering comprehension questions regarding a beginning of 4th grade level text with 75% accuracy. Then we have our essay composition gap, which has a goal for Jack being able to write a 3-paragraph essay. And then multi-digit addition and subtraction. This gap has a goal for Jack being able to add and subtract multi-digit numbers with regrouping with 85% accuracy as measured by. So just one other note about alignment here. Be sure that your goals are aligning back to your gaps as well. We do not look for that for compliance, but it is important that each gap that you have has a goal that aligns to it, and each goal that you have has a gap aligned to it as well. So it should be the same number of gaps to goals. Okay, that was section 4A, B, and C. And then this is, again, is our quick reference guide for section 4D and 4E. And these are very similar, but we're going to talk about them anyway, just to be sure we cover each of these. So section 4D, this is your functional skill gaps. So for FDP2, we'll be looking for your functional and or developmental skill gaps. And we'll also be looking for that house statement for each of those skill gaps. And then that alignment piece. And alignment gets a little tricky here because we have gaps that can be in either developmental or functional, but the goals are in the same section. They're all under section 5B, I guess it is called. And so just making sure that if it's in either one of these as a gap for a functional or developmental gap, the goal would be under that functional/developmental goal. So same thing as far as sorry, Carly, or whoever's doing the PowerPoint today. Same thing for the developmental needs. We'll look at the same stuff here. We're going to want those skill gaps. We're going to want the house statement, and we're going to need to have that alignment piece. So under functional, we're going to be looking at cognitive, communicative, motor, adaptive, social, emotional, and sensory needs. And this will look very similar. Just a reminder that in section 4D, you have to have the gaps listed and your how statement. So your distinctly persistent gaps in functional performance and how those gaps affect the child's involvement and progress in the gen ed curriculum. Okay, so here is the same little breakdown from those broad areas to those skill specific areas. So again, just be getting as skill specific as you can when you're considering areas, those broad areas like cognitive. What is the actual skill deficit that you're teaching using your IEP goal? Is it problem solving? Is it self-awareness? Is it peer interaction, self-initiation, etc.? There are a ton of things that fall under both functional and developmental. But here are some examples of how to really drill down into those skill-specific areas. Okay, and some examples of how statements. Let's use Mary. Mary has deficits in her problem solving, and this impacts her ability to safely engage with peers at grade level. So those are just, again, some examples of how statements. I think there's been some discussion in the chat about whether you can group the how statement or if you have to have one per each, and hopefully the team has talked about that. Sorry, I'm gonna have to close that. I can't monitor the chat, guys, at the same time. So team, one of you guys has that under control right now? Okay, I see.
I think
Carly
Jennifer's taking care of it. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I don't want to ignore it, but we have a long lot to get through. So, okay, developmental. Same thing here. This slide is the exact same. This is just for the developmental needs and the how statements. This comes into play a lot with our pre-K kiddos and our CDS kiddos, making sure that you have those distinctly measurable and persistent gaps in developmental performance and how those affect their access. And I think I saw this question pop up at some point in the chat, and we get this a lot. How to determine whether or not the question is functional or developmental. And so we give a little bit of guidance here about what Muser says, and that's just that functional performance means how the child demonstrates his or her skills and behaviors in cognition, communication, motor, adaptive, social, emotional, and sensory areas. And we have this guiding question, kind of, which is it? Functional goals are often considered lifelong skill deficits that the team feels the child will not outgrow. And developmental are those lagging skill deficits that the child feels that, or that the IEP team feels that the child may outgrow, especially in those younger kids. But really the answer here is that it's an IEP team decision about whether it's a functional or developmental gap and therefore goal. So that's kind of our guidance on that. And as far as what we look for, all we look for compliance is that if it is in academics as a gap or goal, it is an academic gap or goal. And if it's in functional or developmental as a gap, it would be under your functional/developmental goals. So that's what we look for in section, as far as compliance goes for developmental versus functional. This is just a little wrap up because there's a lot that goes into those sections. And this is just compliance versus best practice when talking about your skill gap. Compliant is do not repeat those evaluations results or standard scores as your skill gaps. Your skill gaps should be those specific skill gaps that are being targeted by your IEP goals. And each gap that's listed must have an aligned goal. So that's what we're looking for those gaps in under compliance. And then for best practice, what we like to say, of course, again, is avoiding those broad areas, really focusing on what the specific skill deficit is. And we give the guidance of documenting the gaps in a bulleted list. But we've heard feedback on this, that this is not always feasible or what your IEP teams want to do. Really, the reason we give that guidance is just for alignment. So if you're able to manage that alignment and make sure that any gap that you're identifying in these sections has a goal, that's totally up to you how you want to put it in there. Just be careful if you do put this in more of a narrative form that you don't inadvertently identify another gap in your narrative. Just make sure you're very clear about whatever gaps you're saying the student has and that they have a goal for that. Your how statement is where you can be a little bit more, descriptive of how that is affecting the child's progress. So here are a couple of examples, just in a wrap up of a section 4C and a section 4D. We have section 4C with a student with 4 academic skill gaps: decoding, comprehension, essay composition, and multi-digit addition and subtraction. And here's a good example of an all-encompassing how statement for all of those gaps. And it's just that. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink. It was cold this morning, so I had to turn the heat on, and it's getting to my voice. These academic deficits impact Jack's ability to access grade level texts and understand grade level writing and math assignments. So there's just one example of how you could include all of your gaps in one how statement. As far as functional goes, we have gaps for handwriting, and we have a gap for responding to questions. And this is a way to separate those how statements. So Jack's handwriting, his deficit with motor planning affects his ability to write legibly. And for his responding to questions gap, the how statement is that Jack's language delays affect his ability to communicate clearly and effectively within the same classroom setting during instructional time with both his peers and teaching staff. All right. Okay, but we're going to do a compliance self-check and kind of show you how we hope that the self-assessment could be useful. I am going to just take a pause real quick and just check on the chat and make sure. I see a lot of Jennifer Gleason in there, so it looks like Jennifer's still handling that. All right, good, awesome. And then we do have a question chat check-in right after this check-in. So, okay, this QR code hopefully should work. Let me know if it doesn't. If you want to check out what the self-assessment looks like, the link does work in your PowerPoint. Okay, so you guys are our guinea pigs for the first time we've done this little model here. So I'll be interested to know how this works. So here is what the self-assessment looks like. That's the back section here. This is what would pop up when you open this self-assessment and you get to section RAE1. So this is for section 4A. And I'm going to read through the first couple just to see how this goes. But this is telling you what you're looking for. So you're looking at the results. You're looking for the results of the initial or most recent evaluations of the child. And if you're going to say that, yes, this is compliant, you would have the dates of the evaluations, the name of the evaluations that support the exceptionality identification. And it may go beyond 3 years with an agreement between the SAU and the parent, and that would have to be documented in the written notice. A no would be that it's not compliant because there is evaluation information missing, or it's beyond 3 years with insufficient documentation. So here's our sample, section 4A, that we're going to try to fill out this self-assessment with. So this is the information that we would have on our IEP in section 4A. And we're going to see, is this compliant or is this not compliant? Thank you. I love that you're going to put your thoughts and answers in the chat. And I'm going to have to open it because it'll kill me to not know what's in there. Okay, that's awesome. That's great feedback. Yes. Carly, I was kind of
I was going to say, I can, yeah. So, right. No date and name of the evaluator is missing in the sample. There are no dates. Mm-hmm. And so I think, right. So we would say this is no. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So yes, so that's the no, Laura, you don't need to have the evaluator's name. You may want it in there, but you don't have to have the name of the evaluator. Wanted to be clear because you do need the name of the evaluation. So you're right. There are no dates for the evaluations and no scores to support the strengths for this kiddo. So there was nothing in there to support the strengths that the student has. And so instead, what this could look like to make this compliant would be adding in that, yeah, Carly, I'll let you go ahead.
Oh, me? What am I doing?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay. So yes, so here you have the name of the evaluation and the date of the evaluation. And then you have all of those scores listed, both the ones that support the needs of the student, but also showing the strengths of the student. So both of them. So you want to include all of those standard scores, just not just the ones that support needs. And I was just going to say real quick back here that notice, so if you're going through the self-assessment, when you check no, this little box pops up and says, why is this non-compliant? So it kind of makes you say, okay, you said no, but why? Why'd you say no? So then you would just type in why you said no. But if you check yes, nothing pops up. You would just go to the next question.
And that's a good point, Carly, too, that it's just a self-check, self-assessment. So we haven't figured out a way to be able to get the results to go to you guys as you're doing this without coming to us. And so as you're using it as a tool, there's really no like report back that you're going to get, unless of course you're in cohort and actually doing the self-assessment. But if you're just using this as a self-check throughout the year to check your own compliance, just be mindful that it's really just a self-check to kind of go through your own IEPs. And at the end, you won't get like a write-up or anything. So it's really just, you kind of have to keep track of your findings yourself. Oh, thanks for the link, Jennifer. All right, we're going to try another one. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so this is actually two pieces of the self-assessment. So we're using this section 4C to check our compliance for APG 2, which is the academic skill gaps. And we have the notes on there of academic skill gaps, best practice being a bulleted list. A yes would be that it documents the child's distinctly measurable and persistent academic skill deficits. A no would be that the academic gaps are missing or incomplete. An NA would be for a student who does not have any academic skill deficits. And yes, then we have APG 4, which is looking for that academic how statement. And correct, I see in your chat that in this section 4C, there is no how statement. You got it. And so for the how statement, it would be a yes if there was a how statement. That print small. And no would be if the how statement is missing or it does not answer the question fully of how it's impacting their access to the curriculum. So let's see, we've got Jack's oral reading is a 65 and his written expression is a 74. Is that compliant for skill gaps and is that compliant for how statement? And we have already said, no, that's not compliant for a how statement because there isn't one. So Carly will go to the next page. All right, so we've said no for skill gaps because the gaps are standard scores from the psych evaluation. They're not directly linked to those skill gaps that the student is working on in their IEP goals. And of course, there is no how statement. So how can we make this better? Okay, there we go. In this section 4C, it's much clearer. We've got much clearer. These are the same ones we've already used for examples, but much clearer skill-specific skill gaps. And we have a how statement here. So yes, both of these would be compliant. All right, one more. Okay, this is for functional. So this is going to be for the functional skill gaps or functional/developmental skill gaps. And it would be a yes if it documents the child's distinctly measurable and persistent skill gaps. And it would be a no if the child's distinctly measurable and persistent functional or developmental skill gaps are not included. NA if they don't have them. And then for FDP 7, this is about the how statement, and it's a yes if there is a how statement that sorry, geez, that's really small. I'm sorry, everybody. We will have to
It's
be.
just how it's
Thank you.
affecting them in the gen ed setting
Yep,
or curriculum.
yep. And it's a no if the house statement is missing or it does not answer the question. Now, this is a tricky one. When I made this example, I had a feeling that this was maybe too tricky for this training because there's so much in this one, but they're looking at that section 4D, we can see that there is a skill gap for communication and motor skills, and there's a skill gap for use of technology tools to track assignment. And then there's a how statement that just says that these gaps impact Pam's ability to answer questions from peers and teachers in her gen ed classes. So let's see what we come up with on whether or not this is compliant. And all right. That's exactly right, Amber. You nailed it. I'm so excited. Right. So the how statement does not encompass all of those skill gaps. That was kind of my trick to try and change it up a little bit here. So I know, probably not as exciting as I think it is, but because we see this a lot is why I wanted to use this example, is that functional is very frequently missing a how statement for at least part of the skill gap that's listed, because so much goes into those functional and developmental needs. You've got all your related services, you've got behavior, you've got all those sections. So just be very mindful that any skill gap that is here has your how statement. So for skill gaps, communication and motor skills are really those broad areas. So those are really too broad. Even though they're there, they are a little bit too broad. And there is a missing how statement for that technology tools to track assignments. So those would be non-compliant. So how to fix that? You would make your skill gaps more specific. So instead of those broad areas, we have now answering WH questions and handwriting. Those are those skill specific deficits that are holding this student back from completing those tasks. So we've got answering WH questions and handwriting, and these gaps impact Pam's ability to answer questions from peers and teachers in her gen ed classes. So it's clear how that's impacting her in her day-to-day. And then her gap for using technology tools to track assignments. This challenge with executive functioning prevents her from completing classwork on time. So there's that how statement to cover that. So that would be a more compliant section 4D. As Carly told you, we have slides throughout that go into further detail about these things. So this is one on alignment. So that alignment from those sections 4 through your gaps and down to your goals. There's a more in-depth training on that. It has the link in the slides there. And now we'll do a little check-in. All right, I'm just gonna make sure. Jennifer, I don't know if you could weigh in and just let me know if you've covered most of the questions you think.
Yeah, I've got most of them. Wait a minute. We got, if a student is receiving multiple services, does there need to be a strength statement and a needs how statement for each service? That your how statement needs to cover all of the gaps, and how you do that is really up to you. If you want to kind of do one for each area or one overriding, or you could do one for each gap, whatever works in that situation. And I think I answered all the other questions. If anybody wants to come off mute if I missed your question.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right. We can keep going and we'll have time again at the end to answer any questions that pop up. Okay, so this is about reporting progress. So as Carly, I think, told you, we've added this to our compliance findings. This is not yet on our IEP quick reference guide, I don't believe, but we will be reviewing that progress is being taken as frequently as for gen ed peers. So you can see the little snip from the IEP here, and all you have to do is make sure you're entering the number of times per academic year that progress is being monitored. That's a local control decision because it's dependent on how often your gen ed folks are being monitored. So just make sure you fill that out. And I think I saw the question of how to monitor that, and that's just keep a copy of those progress reports in the file. And the reason we discuss Andrew F here is that's really what Andrew F, the court case, is all about. And I hate to do this to you, Jennifer, but will you just do your little spiel on Andrew F real quick?
I will. I'm going to do a shortened version because everybody's probably already heard it. So this is a case from 2017-ish. And before this, the Supreme Court precedent was the Rowley case, and Amy Rowley was a student who was deaf and was on par with peers academically. And at that point, the Supreme Court said any progress is progress. The student does not have to meet their full potential in order to be benefiting from their special education. So any progress is progress. And then this case came about. Andrew was a student with autism, and his IEPs were just the same year over year. So between his 4th grade and 5th grade years, his parents declined the IEP and enrolled him in a private school that specialized in working with students with autism, and he started making progress. So they filed due process to get reimbursed for that tuition. And based on the Rowley precedent, any progress is progress. The hearing officer, the district court, and the circuit court all found for the school district because Andrew was making some progress, and any progress is progress. The parents appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, nope, this case is very different. And so you need to, when you're writing your IEPs, it needs to be reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress appropriate in light of their circumstances. So basically what this means is you need to calculate your goals so that they can be achieved in a year. It doesn't mean you can't work on the same thing for multiple years. It just means that you need to show progress. So don't just automatically put 80% independence or 80% accuracy for every goal. You need to really calculate what the student is going to be able to do. And in order to help you do this, you really should be collecting and analyzing your data on a regular basis and not just when you do progress reports. Because if you notice that the child is not making progress, you need to change up the programming a little bit to help them out. So that's my abbreviated spiel.
Thanks, Jennifer. So mostly why that, oh, we're skipping right over that. Awesome, love that. That's okay. Nope. Thanks, Jennifer. Just take your data, make changes based on your data, basically is what that is. So if you need to. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the goals. So this again, this is the section from our IEP Quick Reference Guide that talks about what we're looking for, and we're going to start academic goals. And then I think Colette's going to talk about functional, but so we're going to talk about this really quickly. So you'll notice under present levels of academic performance, there are just best practice notes here, and that is that the present level is the baseline data for the corresponding goal, and avoid a range of data. A lot of times in the present levels, we'll see a range of 60 to 70 or even broader than that. And so just try to make that present level as specific as you can with where they're performing, and that helps to make that measurability clear of where you're starting to where you're getting to, because that range isn't exactly clear for where they're starting. And then avoiding subjective words that are like sometimes often about, just give clear data for where they are at that present level and that baseline to where they're going in the goal. So in the measurable and academic goals themselves, what we're looking for compliance is that they have to be measurable. That means there must be measurement data. You cannot use specific curriculum or standard scores as your measurement. And if you use a rubric as the measurement, it has to be attached directly to the IEP. So there's a way to do that in most of the vendors to attach it right to there. I'm not an expert on how to do that, but most importantly, just make sure it's in the file wherever that IEP lives and that it is attached directly to it. And that's because if the rubric is the measurement, it cannot be measured without the rubric. Some best practice notes, we'll go over these, but avoiding multiple skills in your goals, focusing your goals on specific skill deficits that are linked to those gaps, and measuring using skill-specific measurements. We also look for compliance in your measurable goals to have a standard cited. So that's what SBG 4 is, that each academic goal must be cited to the standards. It can be Common Core, MLR, guiding principles, or other district adopted standards, but it has to have a citation to the standard on your academic goals only. And then we also look for every goal being aligned to a service in the service grid. So you're going to want to use your given statement in your goals here to make it clear which service is serving that goal. So we'll talk more about that on the other slides. And then Alt 2 is that if your student has been identified as a student that is taking the alternate assessment, your academic goals must have objectives. That's the only time that objectives are required, but they are required for your academic goals if your student is taking the alternate assessment. Okay, here's another one of our alignment visuals. And so this is that just following through that each of those skill gaps, and we're talking specifically about academics here, but it's true for functional too. All of your academic skill gaps in that section 4C must have a present level and a measurable goal that are aligned to it. And that present level and that measurable goal should clearly be aligned to each other. I won't go over this slide too much. This is the same thing we just talked about. It's right on the IEP Quick Reference Guide, but it's just the compliance versus best practice for that measurability of your academic goals. And we are going to talk about examples more of this. So here we're talking about Molly's present level. We're just giving those best practice guidelines again. The present level should be the baseline data for that corresponding goal. So wherever you're trying to get them to go in your academic goal, the present level should be where they're starting. Again, avoiding that data or avoiding that range of data, and avoid subjective words in your present levels. Okay, this is one of our other favorite parts of this training, you guys, and we're going to work on this, but for now we're going to do it. So I'm sure if you've attended our trainings before, you've seen our pretend reading curriculum, but we give this example because we talk about why not to use specific curriculums in your present levels and or your goals. And here's why. So number one, which we do not have in a slide, but if your student moves from your district or you guys lose access to a curriculum or something like that, then your goals are not going to be, you're not going to be able to work on them or measure them if you don't have that curriculum. And if your student moves, then they also won't have access to that curriculum. So we're not saying you cannot use your curriculums. We're just saying don't write your goals around measuring the skills on those curriculums. So we use our pretend reading curriculum, and I can tell you I was guilty and wrote almost every one of my goals exactly like this, using the FMP level B to level D or whatever. I wrote almost every one of my goals like this. So I totally get this, but we have Leo. Leo is currently reading at a level A in the pretend reading curriculum and giving specially designed instruction. Leo is going to move from level A to level B in the pretend reading curriculum as measured by work samples, etc. So because we have access to the pretend reading curriculum, we know that in level A, Leo is going to be able to do 19 basic consonant sounds, high frequency sight words, and segment simple CVC words. Those are all the things that encompass level A of the pretend reading curriculum. And to get to level B, he'll need to know his vowel sounds, more high frequency sight words, and how to segment simple CCVC words. So this is multiple skills. So if Leo can only achieve part of that, this goal is not going to be measurable. He's not going to be able to go all the way to level B if he's not able to do all of those skills. So again, like we say here, if Leo masters the vowel sounds, but he can't segment his C, C, B, C words, he's not going to be able to achieve this goal, and you can't do progress monitoring. So you can still use those curriculums. What you want to do is just pull out the specific skills that you're working on. So for Leo, instead of level A to level B, we want Leo to be working on segmenting CVC words with 80% accuracy. And we want him to be able to identify 19 of the 19 basic consonant sounds with 100% accuracy. So you can still use whatever you're using, IXL or whatever the things are that you're using to teach and monitor, but really write your goals around those specific skill deficits that the student has, and be clear that that is what you're measuring. So that's the pretend reading curriculum, and our very long-winded way of saying just don't use those specific curriculums. Now, outcome is a little trickier. So we're going to talk a little bit about avoiding outcome goals. So, and I will say, and everybody else on this team will say, we also wrote outcome goals. And so as you're thinking about that, outcome is really what we want for all students. We want all students to be able to do grade level work. And we'll give more examples in functional too, because there's a lot more outcome issues as far as functional goes. But we want all students to be able to do their academic work. So an outcome would be maintaining a B+ average in math. That is what we want for all students. It's not skill specific. To maintain a B+ average in a gen ed math class, that is a ton of different skills. So what you're going to want to do instead is focus your goal on the specific skill deficit that the student has. So does your student have a problem with word problems? Is it identifying attributes of shape? Is it plotting points on a line graph? Like, what is the skill that's holding your student back from being able to meet those outcomes of maintaining a B+ average? So here's a little shift we have of how to shift your outcome-based goal to a skill-based goal. So for Lydia, given specially designed instruction, she will earn an average of 80% in her gen ed math class as measured by goal book data and teacher observation. This is outcome-based. Maintaining that 80% in her gen ed math class is an outcome goal. We want that for everybody. It's not skill specific. It's not telling us where Lydia needs to focus the teaching. And so to make that more skill-based, we know that Lydia, given specially designed instruction and visual support, such as number lines, she will accurately solve word problems involving fractions in 9 out of 10 opportunities across 3 sessions. So Lydia has a problem with word problems with fractions. And gosh, so do I. So just really try to focus your goal on one skills deficit that the student has and measure it on that progress. And that will lead to that hopeful outcome of being able to do better in her math class. Okay, around the citations. So we get a lot of questions about this. So again, as I said, all of your academic goals have to be cited to the standards, and it can be Common Core, it can be MLR, or some other district adopted standard. For compliance, what we are looking for is just that each academic goal is cited to the standard. When we look at your IEPs, we are not digging into that standard to see if it's to judge appropriateness of that standard. We are just looking to see that there is a standard cited. Best practice would be that each of those academic goals is cited to a grade level standard, and that any student that is taking the alternate, geez, you're right about the alliteration, Carly, the alternate academic achievement standards are being cited for students who take the alternate assessment. So those are our notes around the best practice for that. They're linked here, the alternate academic achievement standards, which are also called the geez, I can't do it, Carly. Core content connectors, got it out, are linked on this page. They're known by two names, and they're two alliterative names, so they're difficult to say. But those are just for the kiddos that are taking the alternate assessment, and they're linked there if you need them. Okay. And we give this example. We've gotten feedback in the past, or had gotten feedback in the past, that the MLR is difficult to cite, and I agree. So we just gave one option for how you could cite those involving the strand, the grade span, and the standard number. If you guys have a system that is working for you and it is clear to your IEP teams how you're citing them, that is totally fine. This was just an example of a way to do it if you didn't have one. But as long as there is a citation there, it will be compliant. Now, we also give this note because the standards are a lot of skills. So, and that's how they're designed. The standards are designed to cover a lot of skills. However, your IEP goals are meant to be for one skill. So we see a lot of times that the IEP goal is written directly from the standard. And I think this is the one. No, that's not the one. We very often see will read with sufficient fluency and accuracy to support comprehension. Yes, I got it. And that is a lot of different skills. That's fluency, that's accuracy, that's comprehension, that's a ton of different things. So what we say is that instead of writing the goal as the standard, write your goal first for the skill deficit that the student has, and then just attach a standard to it. You don't need to make sure you're covering each of those pieces of the standard in the goal. And we've gotten feedback that may have been previous guidance that people have gotten, that if you cite a standard, you have to ensure you're covering every piece of it. And that is not what we look for compliance. We just need to see that the skill-based goal that the student is working on is linked to a standard. So long-winded way of saying, write your goal first based on what the student needs, what the specific skill gap is for the student, and then attach a standard to it that's appropriate. All right, and then one more visual for alignment here. So we've gotten so far from our evaluations and identified category to our academic and functional skill gaps to our present levels of performance and measurable goals. And now we're going to talk about the service grid, so your special education and related services. Well, I think we're going to talk about alignment. I think somebody else is going to talk about that further. Yes, we're just talking about that alignment piece. So I'm going to need you to help me out, Carly, just because I can't read that font.
Yeah, sure. This is just basically saying that for each goal that you have, and we're focusing on academic right now. So these are the academic goals for the student. This goal is around SDI for decoding, which would align to that service for SDI in reading. This is a goal for SDI answering comprehension questions. So that would also align to this service for reading. And then writing a 3-paragraph essay would align to writing, and adding and subtracting multi-digit numbers would align to math. So when we look at those goals, we just go, okay, they're SDI, and okay, that's around reading, writing, math. Yep, it's on the service grid. There's alignment.
Thanks, Carly. You guys were almost at our break, so thanks for sticking with us. I know there's a lot in this section. We're going to do one compliance self-check, and then we're going to take a break. So this is going to be around the measurability of your goal. So again, here's your, this is from your self-assessment. So we're looking at SBG 3, which is your academic goals being measurable. And so in order for this to be measurable, when you're looking at your self-assessment, you're going to be looking at all of your academic goals, and we do too, as a chunk. So you're checking all of your academic goals together to make sure that they're meeting all of these areas of compliance. So after review, oh, that's what it says too. After reviewing all of the academic goals, your academic goals will be, yes, compliant for measurability if all academic goals are measurable and enable progress toward access to the gen ed curriculum. And they are not compliant if one or more academic goals are not measurable which would mean that they had no measurement data or used specific curriculum standard scores or percentile data. NA, if your student doesn't have any academic goals. So this is for Ben. Ben's present level, he's currently scoring 190 in numbers and operations in IXL. And for his goal by April 2025, given direct instruction in math, Ben will score 450 or greater in numbers and operations as measured by IXL Diagnostic Action Plan. Do we think this is compliant? Yes or no? You got it, Laura. Identifies a specific program. Awesome. Yes. So how to make this, or here's the no. Yes, specific curriculum, not skill specific enough. Numbers and operations in IXL is not really a very skill specific deficit or goal. And don't use your specific curriculums or programs such as IXL as your measurement. So how to make this more compliant? We're going to say that Ben, given direct instruction in math, he will divide multi-digit numbers using the standard algorithm with 80% accuracy across 6 consecutive work samples as measured by work samples and teacher observation. And there's a standard there. So yes, this is compliant because he's probably still working on the same thing. He could even still be doing it in IXL. It just makes it very clear what the skill deficit is, and it's a clear measurement of whether he's learning that skill and able to progress. And then I think, is that the last one, Carly? Oh, yep, there it is. Okay. Thank you guys for participating in all that. Enjoy your 5-minute break.
Does not look like our timer is working. That's unfortunate. So one more minute. All right, it's 10:23. We still have a lot to cover, and I don't want to rush through it, but we are going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to dive into the functional section. And a lot of this is going to look very familiar. It's a lot of the same formatting as what Ashley just reviewed in the academic section. But starting here, you can see the red is identified as those areas that are for compliance, and the blue is best practice, right? And remember, compliance is what our team is tasked to look at. Those are the pieces that would show up on your corrective action were you in cohort. And best practice really reflects what is better programming for all students. So I'm not going to read all of these. You can see them yourself. But again, just think about when you're developing your IEP, compliance is what you must have. Best practice is what you should have. And this again looks just like the piece in academic. So when you're looking at those functional goals, they must be measurable with clear measurement data. They wouldn't be specific curriculum or standardized scores. As with academic, if you reference a rubric as measurement, make sure that you literally attach it to the IEP. Once you've used it as measurement, you've made it part of the IEP and we would need to see it. Avoid multiple skills. That would be best practice. Either break the goals up or choose one that sort of gives you the biggest bang for your buck. Be very skill specific. Ashley mentioned that multiple times. Really try to avoid those outcome-based goals, and we're going to talk about that. And then avoid using grade level as a measurement. So again here, the best practice for those functional developmental goals would be make sure you've got clear present level data, that baseline data that aligns to the goal that immediately follows it. Try to avoid that range, that 60 to 70%. That would not show up as a finding, but best practice would be, the student is, 67%, 65%. Give us a little bit more specific. And we are never going to pull out a calculator and go through this. We are trusting you. We're trusting your data. Try to avoid those subjective words. Students sometimes can do this. Student often needs support with this. Avoid those subjective words. Try to, again, just be as clear as possible. And this example here in the IEP shows you how that could look for Jack. Outcome goals. I think outcome goals in the functional developmental area, for me anyway, were much more challenging to write. I think outcome for me in academic was clearer somehow in my own head, but Ashley was right. When I started at the department, the district that I was in was up for audit the year that I started at the department. So I was in a position where I was going to be reviewing my own IEPs. Let me tell you, that was a little terrifying because my IEPs were not great. And one of the things that I did consistently with my behavior goals, they were outcome based. I was writing goals that said things like child will reduce instances of biting, child will reduce aggression, those types of things, because that is what I wanted for my student. However, we want all students to come to school and operate in a way that is without aggression, right? We want all students to come and be successful in ways that don't involve biting, right? So you have to really think about what's the skill you're teaching. One of the things that we see all the time is work completion. Student will complete work with 80% accuracy, something like that. We would expect all students to complete their work, right? When they come to school, that is an expectation we have for all students. If your student is unable to do that for some reason, what you want to think about is what is the skill deficit? What is the reason that the student cannot reach this particular outcome? And what are you going to teach to facilitate that, right? So perhaps it's time management. Maybe the child just does not understand that component. Maybe they don't know how to ask for help and therefore they get stuck and they just sit and they're not able to finish their work. So when you're thinking about that, do not write the goal around work completion. because that's not what you're teaching. You're not teaching the child to complete work. You're teaching the child the skills so that they can complete work. And this is the one that I was talking about more specifically. This was me all over my IEPs for sure. I was writing goals around the outcomes. However, at no point was I ever teaching the child, if the child was having a tantrum in front of me, I was never standing there with the child saying, stop tantruming, right? I wasn't teaching them to stop tantruming. I was teaching them to use their break card, or to request a break, or to ask for help, or to use their, toolbox to whatever, use their visual schedule, those types of things. Those are the skills that many of my students were lacking, and therefore they would become aggressive, right? Aggression is communication. So I needed to teach them better strategies. So really think about not the outcome, but what are you teaching them so that they can reach that outcome? And this is how this looks on the IEP. So we have an example of an outcome-based goal, right? So we've got Simon, and the outcome is reducing emotional outbursts, right? We are going to still, and I would still collect data on the amount of times that Simon has emotional outbursts, because that data is going to tell me whether or not the skills are reaching the outcome, right? So the skill-based goal would be identifying 3 different self-regulation strategies by choosing the appropriate visual in real and contrived situations. So therefore, if Simon is able to do that, if Simon is able to regulate and choose those strategies, hopefully his emotional outbursts are going to decrease. You do need to still take data on that, of course, because if his emotional outbursts are not decreasing, then you need to choose a different strategy. You need to teach him a different skill. So they're both very important, but you want your goal to be very skill focused. This is how it would look for Jack. So we have Jack. He is in 6th grade, has been identified with another health impairment due to ADHD. If you think about that alignment piece throughout the IEP, we know that for Jack, there are evals that support this. They are clearly documented in section 4A. And his IEP team identified the following skill deficits paired with the house statement in section 4D for Jack. So he has skill deficits in handwriting paired with his house statement, as well as responding to questions also paired with his house statement. And you can see how each one of those correspond to a goal, right? So that one-on-one correspondence that Ashley talked about, we have 2 skill deficits, we have 2 goals. So just making sure that that alignment is evident. So best practice as the same, it's the same in functional as it was in academic. Make sure that you focus on one goal for each skill deficit and measure them. You can use skill-specific measurements, assessments, data collection, work samples. I would give you the guidance, though, that if you're using like teacher-created data sheets, that type of thing, make sure that you hold on to those, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where someone says, show me the data, and you don't have it. So make sure that you're keeping that. So when are short-term objectives required? They are not required for functional goals. However, we do see them broken out a lot, and that is okay. However, goals are intended to be for the life of the IEP, right? It's that 364-day timeline. Objectives are intended to be short-term. Sometimes we see a goal with multiple objectives that really aren't objectives because they also cover the year. Objectives are short-term. They should be those broken down chunks to help you reach that goal. When we go on site, we are looking at the goal, and the goal should stand on its own. So we would not want to see a goal that says something like goal will be met when following objectives are mastered, or something along those lines. The goal needs to stand on its own. But just remember, objectives are not mandatory for functional, and they should, if you're including them, they should in fact be short-term. And here we have Jack again, and you can see that he has an OT goal, very clearly outlined, and then there are 2 objectives underneath that, and those objectives are intended to help, again, just help him get to that mastery on that goal. This visual you saw in academic, it's the same thing, just making sure that that alignment piece is in place for the service, for the goals, just starting with that eval and working your way all the way through the IEP. Alignment has to be in place, and we do look for it. And this is that alignment back and forth, right? So we've got Jack again. He's got an OT goal. He's got a speech and language goal. And you can see how those two goals align forward to corresponding services. And they also align backwards. In terms of compliance, we are looking goal to service. Best practice would be ensuring that service to goal is also one-to-one. So just make sure that that is in place for your student. Questions in chat? I know, Jennifer, I think you've been sort of answering them as they've been coming up. Did I?
We're all good. Ashley and I are tag teaming.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect.
wait a minute. We're asking for a repeat about service to goal.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So in terms of compliance, when we come inside on site, we are going to check to make sure that there is a service aligned to every goal. So in this example, Jack has OT. There's an OT service clearly outlined. He also has speech. That's also clearly outlined in the service grid in section 7. Best practice would be to make sure that it is aligned the opposite direction, right? So if I look at the service grid and there's a speech service but not a goal, I'm going to give you a best practice note around that. Make sure that it aligns forward and backwards as well as backwards. Make sure it aligns both ways. Okay, anything else? Thank you for answering questions as we go along. I think that's helpful. All right, here is our self-assessment form. And I wish when I was teaching that this had been a thing, because I really do think that this is a tool that can help you understand your IEPs and help you understand that compliance versus best practice piece. It's a way to self-audit. And I think it's a phenomenal tool paired with the quick reference document. I think if you have access to those two and you use those, that your IEPs are going to be compliant without question. So here we have the QR code that'll help you get to this. I know that the link has been dropped in as well, but we have Jack again. So he has his present level here is identified as having moderate deficits with receptive language. Paired with the goal, given speech language therapy, Jack will improve his receptive language skills as measured by work samples and teacher collected data. So if you were looking at your IEP and this was your present level, your goal, your student, would this be compliant? Would you document this as yes or no? So it looks like,
I was going to say, yeah, people are in the chat. They're saying no measurement, not specific enough. So no, this would not be compliant.
Fantastic, fantastic. And you are correct. This would not be. And again, if you look, it really tells you this document, this link really tells you what compliant is versus non-compliant. So yes, this goal has no measurement data. So that would be non-compliant. If we came on site, that would be a finding. So just making sure that you incorporate that. So you can see that this present level has clear data and it has clear measurement. So we're moving Jack from 47% accuracy to 80% accuracy. So that is a much better representation of present level as well as a goal that follows. These links, again, will take you to more specific trainings. We understand that this IEP training is massive, it is long, and there is so much information in it. So these links will take you to components of the IEP that are more chunked. They're much shorter. I think our shortest is 15 minutes, our longest is maybe an hour. So I would encourage you to take a look at these because they break what is a massive training down into something a little bit more manageable. All right, section 6, supplementary aid services, modifications and or supports. So you can see here what would be considered compliant. That is clearly outlined in red. Make sure that gosh, the chat keeps popping up and blocking the screen. Hold on. There we go. So you can see what would be considered compliant. Across that, make sure you fill all of the boxes. We would not want to see any blank boxes. You would want to include ed techs, BHPs, any of those related service assistants, your CODAs, your SLPA, all of those would be documented here, not in the service grid. And when we get to the service grid, they're going to talk about that more specifically. And this is just an example of how it would look. So you can see that first column breaks down what those tools specifically are. Then it tells you where those tools will be accessed, the location, frequency, and then the duration. When I was teaching, I would make sure that all of the gen ed teachers that I worked with had a copy of Section 6 for all the IEPs, because I really wanted them to understand if you're working with a student and they pull out the help card while they're in your classroom, I really wanted them to understand why this was an important tool for the student. So that, if this is the tool that your student uses, make sure that it's documented here, and make sure that all teachers who come in contact with your student understand why it's important and why this tool really is relevant for your student. So other could include collaboration, and that is very different than consultation. Consultation is goal specific. If we see consult in the service grid, or if we see it in a goal, we're going to look for alignment back and forth. But it's important to remember that consultation it's goal specific. Collaboration would be more of that, hey, how's the student doing? Is there anything I need to know? It's just more of that check-in. So you would not document consultation here. That would be in your service grid. We don't really care what you call it here. Just don't call it consultation, because consultation is goal specific. As I mentioned, ed techs, BHPs, related service assistants are always listed here. Make sure that all fields are complete. Don't leave any blanks. Section 6B, this is where you would consider whether or not your student would qualify for the alternate assessment. So compliance would be, if you document this as yes, there must be an explanation. There must be just a blurb in there that explains why. If the child does qualify, then we would also look to make sure that the goals, the academic goals, have objectives. Those objectives must be there. That is compliance. We do not want this to be blank. Best practice would be to document it somehow. And again, provide that explanation if it's yes, and make sure that you incorporate objectives for the academic goals. This is that alternate assessment decision flowchart. The link here will take you directly to it. And it's just very helpful when you're at an IEP team meeting. If you have a student for whom you're not really sure, there are lots of students that I think you could clearly say do not qualify. But if you're not sure, this is the tool that you would use to walk through this with the team to figure out where you want to land with the student. If the student is determined eligible for the alternate assessment, as you've walked through that participation guideline, make sure that you, again, short-term objectives, and that those align to the alternate academic achievement standards, and the link to those is here as well. And all of these links should be live. So this is how this looks for Miss Lily. So you can see that we must have made the determination that she qualified, and then there is her goal and the objectives that align to that goal. These are some links to more specific information around the alternate assessment. There is a whole nother team that really works very specifically with this. So if you have questions around any of these pieces, these links should be really helpful for you. All right, section 7. So again, red is compliance, blue is best practice. One thing that we really need to state quite frequently, even though we understand that this is not a special education issue necessarily, this is not this is a broader issue and we understand that, but child's needs drive services and their frequencies, not the school or program schedule. We often will see this in middle or high school programs where the student is, the service grid documents that the student is in a particular class or study hall or something like that for a block of time that aligns to the school schedule. What you really want to be careful about is just making sure that the child's needs drive the amount of time that they are in those classes, and they're not in those classes simply because that is the block scheduling of the school. We understand that that is a challenge, but that is important to really make sure that it remains individualized for the student. Also remember that content areas, social studies, science, health, or similar, those are not going to be identified on your service grid. You are not going to write goals around those areas. If a student requires support in social studies, for example, because they struggle with comprehension or decoding or any of those areas, your goal will be around comprehension or fluency or those areas. And that goal will hopefully, again, facilitate their ability to participate in social studies, science, health, etc. But you are not going to write goals specific to content areas. This is how your service grid could look. Make sure that the position responsible is filled in by the special educator or the licensed related service provider. Again, you're not going to put a CODA here, an ed tech, a BHP. They are not licensed. They are not certified. They are not the position responsible. Make sure that your location is filled in as well as frequency. Our guidance around frequency would be to just make sure that it makes sense to parents. We don't care how you document it, but it gets kind of clunky if it's like, 1,942 minutes a month or something, just give that some thought. Duration, make sure you've got your beginning and end date. One thing we see quite frequently are ESY dates. Make sure that your ESY dates reflect the duration of ESY and not the life of the IEP. If you are putting the life of the IEP, then what that implies is that you are prepared to provide services during vacations, Christmas break, February break, April break, and I know that's not your intention, but just make sure that your ESY dates reflect that. Speech and language services are only a direct service if the child is a child with a speech and language impairment solely, or as part of a multiple disability, or if the child has a disability category of autism, and speech language are their only service. Every other situation, speech language would fall in related, so just keep an eye on that as well. And this is just how this could look for a student who has reading, writing, math, as well as speech language and OT services. You can see that all of those boxes are filled in. They sort of make sense to the parent, beginning and end date, and they are, the position responsible is the certified or licensed staff. Talked about this a little bit already, but this is just that consultation piece again. And consultation is intended to be rolled out when you are working on skills that have been previously taught in a more restrictive setting, and you're now looking to carry those over in a different setting, one that's a little bit less restrictive, maybe a gen ed setting. So given consultation, child will ... And this is how that would look on the service grid. Now, again, if it's on the service grid, it should be related to a goal, because consultation, remember, is goal specific. Here we have a lane, and this just shows the alignment forward and backwards. So we've got alignment for a lane. You can see that she has an SDI goal as well as a consult goal. So she's receiving SDI and consult from the OT to independently utilize a tool from her toolkit. Okay, so you can see there's consult in the goal. So what we would immediately do is look to the service grid to make sure that it's aligned to a consultation service, and then backwards. So just again, if we look for consult, we're looking for it in both places.
All right, Colette, can I just jump in for a minute and either ask you to review the whole consultation ESY, or, I mean, I'm happy to do it, but either way.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yeah, we
Okay.
see that a lot.
Yeah, so this isn't its own slide, but anyway. So when we review service grids, we note that consultation and extended school year, ESY, are only on the special ed service section of the service grid. And that's a form problem. We're well aware of that. However, when we see that and it's listed as a consultation and then it says OT and it's in the special ed section, we have to mark that as non-compliant. So just note that if you have a related service, if it is on this bottom half as a related service, that's where you're going to document the ESY and the consultation. Okay. So if you have OT consultation or OT ESY, either write it in under OT. I've seen it in the frequency box if you can't put it in with the service itself. I've had feedback from other SAUs that they actually just put it under other and write the whole thing in. Either way, just making sure that if it's a related service, it goes under related service, even though consultation and ESY look like they're a special ed service.
Thank you, Carly.
You're welcome. Oh, hold on. I skipped a slide. There we go.
All right. I know that chats have been coming in and I think people have been answering them furiously. So I think we're all caught up. So I'm going to go on mute and turn it over to Jennifer, maybe.
Yes, indeed. All right, so I think Ashley might take over the chat box duties for me. All right, I don't know how I ended up starting at LRE because it's the
Because
bane
we
of my
know it's your favorite.
existence.
That's why. We know how much you love it.
All right, so this is our section on LRE on the IEP quick reference form. Note under where you write your little narrative there, what we're looking for is how the nature and severity of the disability affects the student's ability to be with same age peers. That is different than what the prompt asks you to do. I have been with the department for 4.5 years, and I've been trying to get this fixed for 4.5 years. State government moves very slow. That's all I have to say about that. So this is why we look for what we look for. This is a blurb from IDEA and Muser, right? Removal of students with disabilities from the regular educational environment shall occur only when the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So why are we pulling this child from their gen ed environment to give them services? Why can't the services be provided in the gen ed environment? That's what your narrative is answering, that question. We're all special ed teachers, so we love a visual support. This just gives you a little pyramid, least restrictive at the top to most restrictive at the bottom, and we are always trying to step that child up to a less restrictive environment as we can. Another visual support, I know you've seen this alignment visual throughout, and as you are in your IEP meeting talking about all these different things, those conversations about all those different things are going to lead to your LRE discussion, those all kind of feed into that LRE discussion. LRE is about the student's access to gen ed instruction. So, I know almost all of us on the team taught self-contained classrooms. If you have a student in the gen ed classroom, but they're like in the back of the room learning something completely different than the rest of the class, that's not LRE. That is not, they're not receiving access to gen ed instruction with their peers. So if they are working on kind of a subset of skills within that same thing that the other students are learning, then that is LRE. So if they're accessing gen ed instruction, it's LRE. If they're not, it's not. So here is an example. Sammy's OHI due to ADHD is to such a degree that he requires individual and small group instruction in the special ed environment. So it can be as simple as that. He needs individual and small group instruction. It can be, he's 4 grades below grade level, so the instruction he needs is not available in the gen ed environment. Or he's working on articulation and needs a quiet one-on-one environment, those kind of things. So why does the student need to be pulled from the gen ed environment? All right, we have another quiz. Woohoo. All right. Oh, all right. Service
Jennifer,
grid
can I
quiz.
ask a quick question before
Please.
you move on?
Yep.
So, in our district, we do a lot of inclusionary, push-in service.
Mhm.
And so oftentimes, the student staff are pushing in to the classroom. And so, when we're writing our LRE statement, I mean, the kids in the general ed setting 100% of the time. But we're writing statements that, they're specific learning disability in reading, require special education supports within the, instruction within the general ed setting. Is that how you're wanting those things written?
Yeah.
More in the general ed?
Yeah, you could, something like that. Their SLD is such that they can get all of their services in the gen ed environment, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
All right.
perfect.
Just want to make sure we're documenting correctly. Thank you.
Good question. And very exciting that you're doing that also. All right, here we go. Service grid. We are looking for all of the boxes to be filled in. We want them in the right place, right? Special education service versus related service. Responsible position is certified staff. So what do we got? Let me just check the. Yep. Nice, Carrie. I think you got everything. Man, ed tech cannot be person responsible. Location is missing. ESY dates are not ESY specific. Impressive. All right, let's see. Location is blank. Ed tech cannot be personally responsible. And ESY dates are for the whole year. Nice. You guys get the gold star today. You got all of the things. So, yep. So here we have not the ed tech, right? We have a special education teacher as the person responsible. Ed tech goes in section 6. If they are actually providing the services, they are still doing it under the supervision of special ed teacher, and the teacher is still responsible. Every box needs to be filled in, and ESY is over the summer. Nice job. That is really impressive. All right, one more. Here's our LRE. Jack attends all specials as well as lunch and recess with his peers, but receives SDI 18 hours per week and speech language therapy 2 hours per week. So what we're looking for on yes is the LRE statement explains how the nature and severity of the disability affects the child's ability to be with same age peers. No how, no nature and severity, no disability, not explaining how. It's not answering the question, right? It's answering the prompt, though. So this is why this is the bane of my existence. This is what, if you just read the prompt, this is what you think you need to put. But we're not looking for a restatement of services. There's actually another part of Muser that says if you have something in one part of the IEP, you don't have to put it anywhere else. So your services are in the service grid. You don't need to put them here. You just need to answer the question of why do they need to be pulled from their gen ed environment. So back to the example we already had, right? Such a degree that he requires small group instruction in the special ed setting. So it doesn't have to be complex. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Again, more trainings that take a deeper dive, accommodations and services. The top link will bring you to the YouTube, and the slides are in the second link. chat, are we all up to date on the chat box, or do we need to hit anything?
Just one question about consult time for academics. If they're being taught by gen ed teachers, is the LRE 100%? If it's a consult service and they're getting all of their direct instruction from the gen ed teacher.
If the services are being provided in the gen ed environment and they're not being pulled for anything, then it's 100%. If they're in the gen ed classroom in the back of the room doing something completely different, then it's not 100%. So that's my answer for that. It doesn't matter who's actually providing the services. The special ed teacher is responsible, and it's about what they're doing and where they're doing it. Abbreviated day. If you have students on an abbreviated day, I would highly recommend you watch this training. Muser is very specific about abbreviated day and what you need to talk about in your meetings and what you need to document in your written notice. So if you have students on an abbreviated day, watch this, or at least roll through the slides if you don't have time to watch it. It's pretty short though. All right. Percentage, meaning what percentage of the time is child with non-disabled children accessing the same things as well, right? Again, so they're with non-disabled children, but again, if they're in the back of the room doing something completely different, then that doesn't count. So it's kind of a multifaceted thing. All right. Anything that we helped you with today that you want to tell us about? Feel free, throw it in the chat. Also, if there's something you didn't get clarification around, feel free to put that in too.
We are at 11 o'clock.
All right, we're going to go through resources super fast. Oh, nice. Look at the outcome goals, feeling better. Nice. You're doing better than half of us, so great job. All right, I'm going to roll through resources really fast here. So this is a link to our law page. In here is the procedural manual. If you have not looked at the procedural manual, look at the procedural manual. It's very helpful for all of the special ed forms. And the next one, this is our page, Supervision, Monitoring, and Support. It's hard to get to. It's hard to navigate the DOE website because it's so massive. But if you click this link here, you will bookmark it. I am the one that updates our website, and I have to keep a bookmark to find it. So bookmark that. Our resources page, underneath that page we just looked at, has all of those IEP quick reference documents. It's not just the IEP. We have one for each form. Up on the top right under that window, there is a link to the model practice self-assessment form. And our information sheets are there. Those are just little fun facts. It kind of pulls some things in Muser are kind of all over the place in Muser, and this kind of pulls things together. Like disciplinary removals, there's stuff in different places, so it brings it all together in one place to give you that information. Our professional learning page, if you click on any of those titles, it will sort by that thing. If you sort by category, IEP Informs is all us. We record all of our trainings and put them up there. This training will go up there. Give it a couple weeks because it has to go through a whole process because we're the state. But it will be up there. And there are also other cool things up there from the Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education, not just us. We do office hours the second and fourth Wednesday of every month at 3 o'clock. Registration links are right here, and the recordings come up on the website within a week or two, hopefully. Again, depending on state things. We have a lot of guest speakers this year. We're super excited. This is where you can get forms, IEP and all of the forms. They have been moving things around on our website, and there used to be a thing that you would click on that said forms, and it would bring you to all the forms. Now you have to go to a thing that says something like resources for families and educators or something like that to get to forms, but this link will bring you there. Feedback, provide us feedback. We love your feedback. We change things up based on feedback. Also put your email in and select IEP training, Carly. IEP training from the drop-down, and Carly will send you contact hours and other goodies for being here with us today. This is where you can find us online, and our contact information is right there. Absolutely reach out if you're struggling with any part of the IEP. If you're writing a draft and are unsure about a goal or something, shoot us an email. Please do not send us an IEP, because in addition to training, we are the people that come out and look at IEPs, and if we see non-compliance, we have to ask you to fix it and then have to ask for additional evidence, and it's a nightmare. So just send us a draft or a hypothetical, not on an IEP form, and we will work with you on that. Whew. Only 4 minutes over. There we go. Thank you so much. We know this is a lot of information and it's a long training, but we appreciate all of your questions. You guys were awesome and had really good questions. So thank you very much for hanging with us today.